RPG. I'm Jonathan Albin, your Game Master's Guide, and today we're going to be talking about, it's a short subject, but it's the 10 ways you can ruin your campaign. Now, I'm not meaning to state these as things that you should do. I'm not recommending them as ways that you might want to kill your adventure, but instead these are ways to save it. So I'm going to be providing the antecedent, so to speak, before the precedent. I want to show you that there are things that might happen in your game sessions that you might want to repair before you run into these same traps. I can only speak to this from experience because these are things that I have done in the past. I've been GMing for 50 years, and not every games group stays together, and not every games group plays together, and for long. And these are 10 reasons that might influence the way your games groups work, and these are things that you simply want to avoid. I'm going to provide you information about exactly what they are and how to prevent them. Before we do that, make sure you go below and click all the buttons to let the algorithm know that you're part of our audience. And so let's get to it.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
All right, so I list these as rookie mistakes, but I'm not wanting to clarify that they are rookies that make them. Generally what happens is these are things that you start off when you're very beginning, and your players are going to be forgiving and they're going to be patient with you. But these are the things that if you hold on to them for very long, they will eventually tear up your games, and I'll give some explanation for each one of them. All right. So you spent several months getting prepared to run your adventure. You've thought about everything. You've written the location. You've got the understanding of what the players are going to be doing. You've got a very clear idea of where you want to take the adventure. And man, have you written lots of notes. And here comes your first session, and you begin to explain. And you explain details and nuances and give the players everything they're going to need to play. That's great first time. That's great first session. But the reality is that a wall of text fundamentally removes rather than enhances the imaginations of your players. You provide them with so much information that they, A, don't know what to do with it, B, they're not sure how it applies, and C, they're not sure how to integrate it into the story that you've been building. When you create the wall of text, you are equivalently doing the very thing that happens in a text lane. You're creating a TLDR situation. You put out too much information, and they don't have any room to breathe. As I've said, this is something that a rookie will do, and at first players will accept it and understand there's a lot to gather. But each time you create this wall, you're actually creating a barrier to your players' creative processes. And what you will find is in most of these cases, your games won't die immediately. They won't even generally be hindered for a long period of time because players are patient and want a good game master and want a good story, and they're hoping you will improve over time. But this is one of those situations that they won't tell you about. The issue of a wall of text is just providing them too much information. I guess you'd have to compare it to, in the music scene, they talk about the solid wall of sound, and you want to create instead a tapestry. You want to create a place of weaving of connections and interconnections that allow the players to hook their story onto what you have built. If you have a huge amount of information to provide them, find ways to parse it into smaller groups. But the wall of text is a game killer, and you will be far better off if you learn how to parse this information. And it does take some time. It's taken me years, and I'm only speaking again from experience. So avoid a wall of text if it's a consistent and every game's assessment that you're going to provide them with a bunch of lore, you will eventually drive the players to move away from your game simply because they don't have the processing space, or they don't feel like they're connecting to the story because it's being presented in a two-dimensional flat fashion. Again, from the standpoint of a new player, new game master, you're very excited about what you've built. You've got an intention to what's going on. You've built in the story. You've provided the hooks, the clues. The players have gathered that information diligently, and you're really thrilled about that. But you don't let it breathe. You don't let the players glory in what they've done. Instead, you are very impatient. You want to grab that information from them, and you immediately race forward with the story, even before they've had a chance to even appreciate what you've done for them. And this zealous impatience, again, is something that you're not going to be even aware of at first. And if you've had a situation where your players are walking away from your game 3-4 weeks after you started, or maybe your group has dwindled from 5 or 6 players down to 1 or 2, it has to do with the fact that you're perhaps rushing them too much. So this is an area where you can repair it if you simply slow down and accept what's going on in the greater sense of the term, and give the players room to appreciate and expand into the world that you've created. Don't be so impatient. A game session, while it is a limited amount of time, you will have more sessions to advance the story. So don't be so pressured to be over impatient and desirous of the game to move forward. Just let the players develop it at their pace, and it will improve, I promise. Another great example. You spent the entire week getting ready for the session. Maybe you're running once a month, and so maybe you've had a few weeks. So you've built out your NPCs, and you've built out the information that they have to carry, and you have built out the interaction that you imagine, so much so that when the players step into the scene, you've already filled out what their agenda will be simply by having NPC after NPC interaction. And again, while these are very useful tools, they are not something you want to hammer your players with every week. Again, the idea of a campaign where you are perhaps building out your NPCs, maybe consider them, instead of being just a source of information, perhaps give them a life or a depth. In the concept of a campaign, you don't necessarily have to give everything to the players at once. You can do it segment by segment over a longer period of time. Let the NPCs have their space, have their breath, have their reason for being. If the players decide they want to go to the bar to talk to the barkeep that they've been talking to, maybe it's okay for them to have to wait till the next shift because he went off a couple hours ago and won't be back until tomorrow. The idea here is that when you build out your NPCs, don't fill out their agenda so deeply that they can't be living beings, because the interaction between a non-player character, what I actually refer to generally as a non-enjoined person, a personality that the players are not playing, have them be a regular person, have them have a time and a place to be met with and coordinate, so that this feels more natural. A overloaded NPC agenda will just feel forced, and you don't want that to be the case. You want to make it as simple for them to engage as possible, and yet you don't want it to feel simply like an overload. Let me give you an example. I had a games group where they had a certain person they needed to gather information from, and he was a kind of a helpful Hal. He had a lot of information to provide. I made the error, if you will, of making him constantly available, and so pretty soon the players were basically cajoling the NPC to move with them as part of the adventuring group. And this, while it seems to be appealing, it's actually kind of seductive, because now you're part of the story and you're not allowing the players the agency to figure stuff out on their own. And so simply by reducing the identity of your NPC and softening the agenda, it makes it easier. If you are dealing with, for example, a group of adventurers and they come into a town, if you've overloaded one or two NPCs, then all the other NPCs, all the other people in town that they run into will be treated like cannon fodder. They will be treated like they are not to be dealt with, and they will be treated like fundamentally another class of citizen. And that's not realistic, and it's not helpful for the players. So definitely try to download your NPCs over time and let the world, the adventure itself, breathe a bit more. Let's say you've had a history of running very, very good combat sequences. The players come, they set up, and within minutes they are engaged in a big fight scene, and you're providing them with all of the warfighting possibilities and engaging them every week in that combat. Well, some players really dearly love the conflict and the combat, and yet others really prefer to have a game that is less about the combat and more about the interaction with the players. So instead of overloading them with combat, because that's what they were very good with, just realize that it's like a diet, your eating processes. If you only eat hamburgers all the time, pretty soon you're going to be sick of hamburgers. If you provide them with only drama and they want combat, then provide them a little bit of everything instead of overloading them on one thing. Again, as a new game master, you get experience with what's going on, you experience with the different pieces, and you go, oh, I really like this part. But if every session is that, pretty soon your players will start to, that was weird, my camera went crazy. Every once in a while your games will start to dwindle again because your players will, those that were looking for conflict and you're not providing it, they're going to wander away. If they are puzzle folk and you're not providing them any puzzles to interact with, they're going to dwindle and walk away. So the death of a campaign group doesn't necessarily mean the overall immediate cessation of play, but you're simply going to notice this dwindling properties. And so when you have a game that is got a nice mix of everything, you're going to have much happier players. All right. You've built a story. You've had several weeks of really enjoyable play, but the players are starting to drift. It feels to you like they're not paying attention to the story. So you provide them with a reminder. Perhaps it's a gentle reminder at first, but as time goes by, these gentle reminders become more daunting, more imposing. And when people talk about that feeling of this story becoming railroaded, they're really talking about the fact that they are no longer feeling like the story is of their characters or of what their interactions are, but instead they are a response to what you as a game master have been pursuing, and you start to push the story over the characters. I had a conversation the other day with a person who had a much more stringent definition and were very concerned that my emphasis on story was overlaying the player's agency. And the reality is that that person had not experienced any play with me, but were only responding to something I said in a video. And this concept of a story hammer, it can be subtle, but if you're constantly utilizing it as your only resource to drive the players to move forward, then it's fundamentally damaging to your story. And again, your players won't stop playing individually, or rather collectively. Instead, they will stop initially in small groups because they no longer feel the desire to follow the story. It's no longer an enjoyable experience, and therefore, rather than face you directly and challenge you on it, they'll simply find reasons to not be there. And I hate to see it happens all the time. One of the reasons, ironically, that I play at a board game store on a regular basis is that there are constantly new players that are able to jump into the campaign. And so our numbers ebb and flow. Some weeks we have 17 players in a session. Sometimes we have 2. The idea is that if the story hammers are too strong, you will drive your numbers down, and it won't just be the happenstance of life. It'll be your game that actually push the players out of the limelight and are driving the story out of existence. So downplay and underutilize, if you will, the story hammer. The players will make the story go, and all you need to do is provide them with resources so they can find the pieces they want to pursue. This one I've mentioned a couple of times, and this doesn't happen to the newbie perhaps, but it does happen within a short period of time, and that is when you get a role, a pattern going on, and your players are enjoying the game, and you're building, and you've got creativity going on, you tend to find that you don't have to work as hard, so to speak, as a game master, and it can be problematic that at some point you're literally doing the minimal involvement, and the players can experience this. They can see it coming, and again, they're not going to quit en masse, but they are simply going to simply not show up because you're not showing enough care to make sure that the game is something that they want to be a part of, and you're not showing your own interest in it. So be careful not to ease back too far. Now, in the case of every one of these, all of these steps that I brought up, even up to this one, the point here is that any of these can be done to excess. So yes, you can take it easy for a week or two, especially if you've got some really good drivers in your game, but don't get to the point where the story is no longer mattering to you so that you are just literally phoning in the experience and not actually endeavoring to play it. Now, I know that it happens sometimes, but generally speaking, you want to avoid this threat because this will hurt your game in the long term. Okay, so your players, again, you've been building for a while, your adventurers are working together, they're moving towards the objective, and as they do so, you are so excited about their advancement that you're continuing to pursue the story and expand the idea of the adventure, and you're not rewarding them for their creativity. You're not acknowledging the parts that they've brought to the table and the cleverness with which they have acted. So make sure that you are rewarding and acknowledging the creativity that the players bring, because hopefully if you're doing an inventive job and a creative job on your side, you'll be getting the accolades from them. But don't overshadow those things that the players are doing that are bringing joy and excitement to the game, but instead make sure that they are lavished with the praise, because that's something they will keep coming back for week after week. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the two-letter assassins, and I think you probably know what I'm talking about here, but that's the concept that a player describes something they want to do, and you give them a flat-out. You don't have to even say the word, you simply shake your head or put your head in your hands, or however you try to react to it, wherein you are giving them a negative response. And that two-letter assassin will do its damage week over week, especially if you've got a player who is working and endeavoring and trying really hard to build a story, and every piece that they're providing, you're acting like you're afraid of it and are therefore countering rather than accepting and embellishing. I've talked several times about the idea of an improvisational class, and while they are not a mandate, it is interesting to watch improvisational humorists talk about the yes and process, and the idea of overcoming the two-letter assassin is really important, because if you say no to a player's attempts week over week, they're just not going to find any interest in the game. They're going to see the boundaries as too severe, and they're simply not going to find a reason to come to the game. So make sure that you do what you can to limit or eliminate any of the two-letter assassins that might be in your vocabulary. All right, so you've been running 3 or 4 or 5 months. Everything is going well. You have to worry about whether or not you've developed a formulaic approach. This does happen a lot in fictional writing. If you've looked at any fantasy literature, there is a tendency to write to a formula. In other words, rising experience, villainous appearance, danger of the parent of that NPC or that villain suddenly is subverted by a surprise, and then you come back with the actual solution. But that pattern of do this, surprise, that rhythmic pattern can actually harm your adventure if it's the same week over week. One of the reasons why I recommend reading a considerable amount of fiction material is you provide yourself with alternative options and possibilities that are not being represented in other formats, and you give them a fresh place to be in your game. So while you can develop formulas for your campaign settings, make sure that you break up which ones are used when, so that there's not expected a formula, because the players will, again, simply stop coming to your game because they see the formula and they've already played it through it enough times. That's not a good thing. You want instead to be able to mix it up and give the players alternatives and ways of accomplishing things, and even solutions that don't meet with the formula that you've developed. All right, and this one is the most problematic. And when you've got a games group that is working well together, but you've got one or two players that are the agents of change and the agents of action, and you depend on those 2 or 3 personas, maybe it's just one, but you've gotten to the point where you clearly spend 40 minutes with this player and 40 minutes with that player and then 4 minutes with everybody else. You want to give everybody their moment to shine, their ability to be part of the story, and so you don't want to develop this partiality. It's a natural tendency, especially if you've got 2 or 3 players that really work well with the story and are grabbing a hold of what you're putting out there and are presenting the story the way you would like it for it to be seen. But make sure that you are also recognizing others at the table and not focusing only on what's suiting your personal desires from the game, and give everybody their time to interact. Now, these are all things that I talk about as rookie moves, and no, they don't all come from rookies. As a matter of fact, these are situations where even the most diligent game master really needs to maintain a solid understanding of self-reflection and practice of the pieces of the game. Where you show weakness in the past, change it up. If there is a flagging of interest, look for what might be more interesting to the players. The social interaction that occurs in gameplay is also representative of the social interaction that you have with your players. And a good process of creativity, imagination, self-reflection, self-respect, and practice actually results in better games overall. So my question is to you, now that you've heard these pieces, what elements do you face in your games that might be the dangers that you are facing? If these that I've written fit in great, write a comment. Let me hear how you handled it in your game and how you avoided these pitfalls. If you've run into these pitfalls and have overcome them, share your success stories. So let's have a great conversation as well. I want to thank you again for being here. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG. And do remember that next week we will be launching the Kickstarter for Nikos RPG. The entire suite of books is now available, and I will put the links below on how to get a hold of it. Let's put the games to good use at your tables. And I used to say go play, but I'm going to tell you right now that we need to play together. So come and play with us. Talk to you again next time. I'm Jonathan Albin, Nikos.